Welcome to the Love Letters to Our Bodies podcast. I'm your host, Gwendolyn Mitchell, founder and CEO of Moyo Institute and lifelong spiritual seeker and energy worker, here for thoughtful conversations about health, healing, and happiness by, for, and about Black and African American women. Disclaimer, the Love Letters to Our Bodies podcast does not provide medical advice. The opinions, experiences, and insights shared are for informational purposes only. Nothing shared in this podcast is intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other healthcare provider. Don't disregard or delay seeking it because of what you've heard on this podcast. Thank you. Are you ready? Let's dive in. Welcome to Love Letters to Our Bodies, conversations on health, healing, and happiness for, by, and about Black women. I'm your host, Gwendolyn Mitchell. My guest today is my good friend and Moyo board member, Dr. Lucretia Bolin. She is a self-described survivor, thriver. We know her as a healthcare provider in allopathic medicine, as well as integrative and complementary therapies. She's an advocate, activist, and BIPOC wellness coach. Dr. Lucretia Bolin is a Ph.D. trained family nurse practitioner. She spent the last 3 decades working to improve access to treatment for those with problems related to addiction and violence, specifically sexual violence, domestic violence, and femicide. She's an avid world traveler. We've done some of that together. She speaks French and Portuguese and holds 2 black belts, the first in Jiu-Jitsu as a Jiu-Jitsu Terra under the tutelage of Master Ralph Gracie, and the 2nd degree black belt in Kuk Sool Won under the tutelage of Song Jin Shu. I hope I didn't mess that up. I'm delighted to call her a friend, and we're on this life journey together. Welcome, Dr. Bolin.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here with you and to be here on the Moyo podcast and talk about some of the work that I've been doing and talk about the Love Letters Project. I'm really excited, really excited. So thank you. Thank you very much.
You're so welcome. And I want to just acknowledge you for our listeners and let them know that you are a member of Moyo's board of directors. And I really appreciate your guidance over the years. And you also participated in the workshops where you facilitated the breakout rooms for women, creating a safe space for them to share their stories and to really feel supported, holding space and really sharing energy with them. So thank you so much for that as well.
It really was an honor. I think we're talking about something today that is extremely important. You know, healing happens in community. And I mean, obviously, we'll get into this a little bit more, but particularly around cancer, the stigma around cancer, different types of cancers that actually lead to actual loss of body parts, all of these things, you know, we need a safe space to be able to talk about these things and to heal.
And today's topic is making peace with life's challenges. And I think that you're really the right person for this topic, that you have a lot to contribute in terms of helping us to understand what that looks like. And so I want to start by asking you to bring us up to speed with how things have been since you participated in the Love Letters workshops, but also to share a little bit about your own journey and how you've come to a place of peace internally.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, wow. I think when I actually participated in the Love Letters Project, it's been maybe a couple of years now. I was first diagnosed in 2003. I was 43, 42, and underwent a medical procedure because I was having, common to Black and brown women are fibroids. It's not an uncommon situation. But long story short, I'd had some abnormal bleeding and ended up having a hysterectomy because of those fibroids. And as a result of that hysterectomy, I found out several days later that I had endometrial cancer. Endometrial cancer is fatal. If caught early, it can be cured. And usually that cure is a result of having, surgical intervention or a hysterectomy. So 2003, what's it, 220? So 20 years later, for all intents and purposes, that's why I use the word survivor. And the reality is, it also was an opportunity for me to kind of I'll use this phrase, come to Jesus and really start to think about what really mattered for me in my life.
hmm And that's really a beautiful example of how these things that we encounter, like the things that really could tip us over and take away our sense of hopefulness, depending on your makeup and what you choose to do with it, can be a guiding light for the rest of your life.
No, I think you're hitting onto something, because the other part of that was in 1988, I embarked on what's probably been one of the more impactful journeys in my life, which is getting sober. And, I had been sober then, I don't know, 12, 13 years. And I'd done a lot of work to have the kind of life that I wanted. And so here was this thing that popped up that I thought, well, why am I being punished? Or how did this happen to me? And I also didn't want to die. So, it was just a overwhelming experience as I'm thinking about it, which is why the project is so important, and that there is community for women, Black and brown women, who are healing and surviving from cancer, thriving. I remember at 13 or 14, my grandmother's friend who got uterine cancer. Nobody talked about this. Woman who ended up, when I say young, in her 40s, and ended up dying as a result of that. And, there are many pieces to that, why that happened and how it happened, but a lot of that has to do with a lack of education, a lack of information, lack of access. But I digress a little bit, but it really, as I'm thinking, reflecting on the power of the podcast, it just gave me a lot of pause for gratitude, as well as to be in community with other women.
Beautiful, beautiful. So, what's been happening since the workshop?
Oh my God. What's not been happening? I retired. I was worked for 22 years for the city and county of San Francisco, doing trauma work and predominantly working in public health setting. And it's been a year of transitioning from that role, that title. And in addition to that, starting to pursue some other interests that are around health and alternative medicine, complementary medicine, that really is focused on healing. So doing some coursework, traveling, enjoying my life.
It's interesting you say that because in the workshop, we talk about the difference between curing and healing, for instance, and making the distinction of having the symptoms removed surgically or otherwise, through radiation or whatever. But to recognize that at the core of all of what's manifesting in the body, whenever anything manifests in the body, it's been developing for a long time in the subtle energy layers. And so usually there's a story behind it. And so part of the focus on healing is getting to that story and getting that story released and addressed.
You're touching on we might have to, I don't know, another podcast. And the reason I say that, because you were talking about, at least what comes up for me, is that we don't exist in just a physical plane, right? There's so much more to us as divine beings, and impact of all kinds of things. The government, now you're required to do this thing called the ACEs scale. And I don't know if you've done it when you've gone to see your healthcare provider, but the ACEs scale actually measures and asks about traumatic incidents. It seems like common sense to me, but many Black and brown people live with just a smorgasbord of things that qualify on that list from the time of birth and the impact of that. So you're speaking to healing in a much bigger context. And I think that is what makes also the workshop and the writing the letters really powerful, because it's just not the physical. We can heal the physical, but if we can't heal the mind and the way we think, continue to be at risk for these kinds of illnesses.
Absolutely. We talk about the fact that when we really uncover, when we begin to go through these interactive polls and look at whether or not there's been trauma that is identifiable and at what stage it happened and whether or not the person felt supported in the process, all of those things impact the health. There's this beautiful book, The Body Keeps Score, and it talks about how trauma is basically written in the cells and shows up much later in life.
Yeah, no, that's a fabulous book. And that for me, I got introduced to that book maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And I had a hard time with that book because it also meant learning to pay attention and learning to developing a more deeper connection with my person and my somatic memory in my body. And I do believe the body knows, there's always, it's a few steps ahead of the game, but the mind has a way of sort of almost checking out. I couldn't agree with you more about that.
We think of it as all this, we're just this, but the body is like a separate entity. It has its own intelligence. And if we pay attention, your point about if we pay attention, so much of the focus is on increasing awareness, because when I think about the things that my body has taught me over the years, my body taught me not to leave conditioner in my hair. And now we're finding that leave-in conditioners and those sorts of things are laden with carcinogens in many cases. My body taught me what not to eat, for instance. And so I just really encourage women to become aware and pay attention to what's going on. And something as simple as journaling what your response is after you've eaten a certain thing is a way of interacting with the body's wisdom.
Exactly. You're speaking to, in conscious medicine and in, I consider myself a Buddhist. Sometimes I'm A plus 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 Buddhist, and other times I don't do so well, but it's, all life is practice. I embrace that. But when you were talking, I thought of this, and I believe this, what's called inner knowing and inner healing, right? The body does know. And we've gotten this is just my opinion, obviously, we've gotten so far away from teaching that and paying attention to that. I will tell you the story that regarding my cancer, it's profound when I think about it. I was in Hawaii diving and I was menstruating at that time. And I was just really just having very heavy flow and almost drowned. I went to Kaiser right after that happened, right after I got out of the ocean. And I had this sense, I was like, something is wrong. Had a biopsy that same and got back to the Bay Area. Biopsy report came back, showed nothing. And you have to remember the uterus is like a big upside down pear. The biopsy that they took must have missed the cancer. Okay. So I got back and my doctor put me on medication and basically said, "Hey, Lou, you could stay on that. It'll stop your periods, but you can stay on that." And I said, I don't want to. I need this out. And when she called me, I'll never forget the message she left me. What she said was, she called me, left a message. "You must be leading a charmed life." And I thought, well, that's a weird thing for a doctor to say to a patient. And then I called her back and she said, "In the 40 years I've been a gynecological surgeon, I have never found a cancer accidentally, but something the body knows, something being like something is wrong here." But that developing that kind of sixth sense to listen, how to do that. And I think you mentioned journaling as a way to begin to connect with that process. But that takes a lot. It's a practice and takes a lot of time.
I'll share one story. It's a little bit off the mark, but it really drills this point home. I was walking on the beach in St. Lucia, and a voice just spoke to me and said, "The reason you have eczema on your stomach is because of the mercury in your fillings that's leaching into your system." And I was like, really? So I go home and I call my doctor and I want to get an appointment about this. And she tells me that there's nothing, that's a theory, there's no proof of that, right? And they don't have a treatment for that. And so a couple weeks later, I'm sitting in the acupuncturist's office and I look up on the shelf and there's a book about disease symptoms and causes. And in that book, it talked about eczema. I went to that page, and one of the things it said was the mercury from the fillings in the teeth. So, of course, I went the next week to a holistic dentist to have all those bad boys removed. you know and so that's just another example. If we pay attention and if we take action when we're given these clues and we're giving these messages, we can do a lot better.
You're raising another issue that this is why it's important to share information. This is why it's important to read and to talk to other people, other thrivers and survivor. I've been a healthcare provider over 35 years, working in Western medical systems. And providers sometimes miss the mark. They're not always right. And I think, we're getting into some deep water on this one, but sometimes, particularly, we live in a world where there's a lot of bias, and I'll just call it what it is: racism, tide, et cetera, where Black and brown folks may not get, they may get the basic standard, or they might even get brushed off. Like your eczema, there's no relationship to eczema and mercury, right? But had you just accepted that, you would probably still be trying to manage your eczema today, right?
Exactly.
It raises the issue of having enough internal presence to say, respectfully, I need another opinion, or that's not what I've read. So being an advocate and advocating for yourself and as a consumer of Western medicine.
Absolutely.
I love that you were able to say that, and that you had the wherewithal to actually, hey, I'm going to check this out and follow up to take care of yourself. And I think one of the things about the Love Letters Project is when you're in the room and you're writing with other folks and you're talking and you're listening and you're actually doing the online course, that you get to hear other people. As I see people soldier on, so to speak, it's like, oh, I can do that. Oh, I did that. And that's what's really helpful. Otherwise, because cancer, the diagnosis of cancer can be so stigmatizing. I mean, we've come a long way, but it can be so stigmatizing. And if it's a common, or when I say common, a female cancer, the loss of your breast, the loss of your, there's so much identity tied up into that. And so one can feel really isolated and depressed.
Absolutely.
The Love Letters to Our Bodies podcast is sponsored by Moyo Institute Incorporated, a nonprofit organization offering heart-centered educational experiences, and the Lloyd Symington Foundation, which supports visionary grassroots cancer programs.
In fact, one of the things that inspired me to do this workshop was my sister, who had breast cancer and a recurrence of breast cancer. And one of the things that I observed during the course of her struggle with this disease is that she was never able to make peace with her body that had changed. It was never okay for her. And it really felt important to me to really begin to help women understand that, okay, the body has changed. But if you look real closely at the stories you're telling yourself, some of those stories existed before the body changed, right? And so we want to kind of uncover that. We want to kind of go there because, yes, the body changed. And what I can say is that I've been really encouraged by the feedback from women who say, like, now I feel more gratitude towards my body. And yes, this wasn't the case when I took the first workshop 2 years ago, or, by listening to people talk about all that they've overcome, it really encouraged me. So I think that it's important to be with what is, to be able to be in acceptance. And also, I know that it takes time, and everybody's journey about that is different. And so we don't make anyone wrong. We just really open lens to a wider view, what's possible in terms of our relationship to our bodies.
I really love what you said, and particularly referencing your sister. And I pretty much every day I have a practice that I follow, which is, some early morning quiet time or meditation. And then I read some literature. And one of the things I typically read is, about the 24 hours. Let's just stay in the 24 hours. And then the other thing that I read is really about my most urgent and basic life task is to love and accept myself, no matter what. And this is a practice, and particularly when you grow up with a certain idea and you reference, these imprintings, these things that you learn very early in life as being real and immutable truths when they are not that, time to come to terms with that. And I do think that the Love Letters Project, one of these days I'm going to turn the table and interview you about with this, and just really want to acknowledge Moyo and say thank you for just making healing available. I was really touched by some of the women, many of the women and their stories, and also touched by what I call heartbreaking humanity, our collective shared suffering around this and around the bigger piece, because I do believe this, that many cancers have a connection to energy, they have a connection to trauma, but we don't know that, or we're not taught that. And experience that in a group to see that, oh, wow, this happened to you, this happened to you. Or we look at, when I say trauma, specifically, poverty can be trauma, sexual violence can be trauma, growing up in financial instability, growing up with people that are drinking and drugging, all these things contribute to our emotional well-being and our mental health. How I think, what I believe becomes what happens. And I really do believe that.
You're absolutely correct. And the other piece of that is the idea of what's beautiful and what's not. So, part of what we do is we have women to identify, what body part do you love, right? Because we've grown up with all these ideas about, like, oh, I'm too dark, I'm too fat, my nose is too big, my feet are too flat, I'm flat chested, or my busts are too big, my butt, we've got all these things, like where we've been really dissing our body the whole time. I think it's so important to turn the table on that and begin to look at the beauty that is a functioning body. The fact that we're able to breathe, the fact that we're able to see, able to walk, all of these things that we take for granted, these are gifts from the universe, from the divine. And if you think about beauty in its absolute sense, all of it is beautiful, all of it is beautiful. So it's an opportunity for us to really go back, and reassess what we've taken on in terms of the imprints around beauty standards, and really receive ourselves and claim our own beauty. And that is really one of the most powerful things, I think, in the workshop.
No, it really was actually when I'm just thinking about and I guess you mentioned something earlier when we started, which was, if you are newly diagnosed, and I can't recall, but a lot of folks a lot of the women in the podcast had been living with, surviving, thriving, or in active treatment with their particular diagnoses for some time. And I really have this sense, if you could, across a span, see other women who, it's like they've found a way to make peace with this is what is, as opposed to trying to change the past
Exactly.
cannot be changed, right? The project really, and I think one of the more intimate aspects of the project for me was writing a letter to my body. It sounds easy, you know, but it took me back to, I had a lot of gratitude 20 years later, 21 years later, and noticing initially some sense of betrayal. And also growing up feeling like I'd had a lot of betrayal in my life, right? And that it was just me all by myself and on and on and on to move across this trajectory, this journey, this healing, and not just healing in the body, but healing in the heart and the soul and the spirit and the aspect, like everything about me. But to arrive at this place of like, this body has really served me well, and it still works despite it's still serving me. And to have, and I think gratitude is a superpower, like a pure and thankful heart cannot entertain great conceits. And so, and I think that was another powerful lesson in writing the letters is the gratitude, you know, gratitude for the healing, but the gratitude for my life, the gratitude for the journey, the gratitude for the recognition of the human spirit. We are amazing, but resilience.
For sure, for sure. And some of the women talked about the fact that they never thought they would be saying this, but they recognized that their diagnosis actually was a turning point for them. And it really caused them to wake up into life in a more full way and really assess some habits and some patterns of behavior and put themselves first, you know? And we, as Black women in particular, have been the carriers of all the burdens in the world, like everybody else's requirements come before ours. But to actually be in a position where you simply have to put yourself first, have some boundaries, stop worrying about what other people are thinking or saying or trying to live up to this standard or that standard. It's been really amazing to observe and listen to the women as they talk about that part of their journey.
Yeah, that I think that acknowledgement, or to be able to see that, to come into alignment. And as I said, when we started, I just remember so clearly the day she left me a message and I thought, uh-oh, something is wrong, right? But I remember getting the news and I went for a walk and I was crying and I walked past a tree and I just stopped. I said, I don't know if I'm going to get to see this tree again. I don't know what's going to happen. And that I stopped to actually take in. And it's like breath, right? Breath is just so important. It's really the first thing that develops in neonates is the heart, not the brain, but the heart. And the heart is that rhythm that connects all of us. But I can remember when that diagnosis happened. And here's the other thing is I wake up and I forget. I wake up and I forget. My point being, sometimes these things shake me back into that I'm part of a bigger whole. I'm part of nature. I am going to die. I am of the nature to get old and be infirm. These things I cannot prevent. And so how to embrace this very special thing. Life is really a very special gift. But it wasn't until I had cancer that even resonated for me, because I was busy trying to do this, trying to do that, trying to get money. And it just kind of simplified. People I wasn't, I couldn't get along with, they were gone. Because I realized I needed also the energy for my own healing. And I needed to surround myself with like-minded people. Resonate for you?
It does. And, you're reminding me of the fact that in your letter, I was so blown away by your sharing that Buddhist statement. You wrote that you had made peace with the inevitability of death. And I just thought that was so profound and something that many of us still have to get to. And I just wondered if you wanted to talk about that a little bit.
I mean, when you say that, what I realized, I think that was at a time as well where my Buddhist faith deepened because I could remove it from the personal. It wasn't anything against Lou per se or anything that I had done per se, that this was just the way things were in the world. Like the sun comes up and, the moon, and we have the seasons and the birds. It occurs to me sometimes, I find this profound. The birds know what to do. They get up and they just start singing. They don't need anybody to tell them, right? My body knows what to do. And it's me with all these other things that I drag around, these ideas that actually interfere with my peace. And when I say this, like PEACE of mind, the awareness that one day I'm going to die really took root in that diagnosis for me. Like, yeah, this is real. This is, there's no do-overs here. This isn't like, I'm not going to live maybe I'll live to 100. I don't know. But the reality was that awareness meant for me, Lou, really try to do the things that you love. Really try to be with the people that mean the most and matter. Try to be the best Lou I can be by my own standards. And I live that every day. It's a conversation I think we don't have enough really with each other. And when we don't have that, we can ignore things. We can ignore slights and hurts and ruptures because I'll tell them tomorrow. But, tomorrow's never promised. Like that's it. And that's really helps me to really like embrace life. And doesn't mean I'm not scared. I'm a human being. So yeah, sometimes I'm scared, but still want to show up from the depth of my heart for this life. And perhaps I do believe there's another one for me, maybe not but for me.
Well, yeah, I always think of it this way. Somehow I opened my eyes and I was here. So it's likely that one day I'll open my eyes and be somewhere else. It really, speaks to the eternal nature of energy, number one, and essence and spirit, soul, however you want to describe that it's that part that is indestructible. It's that part that is permanent. I remember once when I was having a real stressful time in my life. I always refer to it as the voice because I'm always getting these messages, sometimes out loud in the room and sometimes in my head. But one time the voice said to me, "Don't you get it? Nothing can harm you." And nothing can harm you. And I thought about that for a long time. And I realized that, yeah, this physical body can be harmed, that my emotional self can be harmed, my psychological self can be harmed. But these are aspects of me, the essence of me, which is really the part that is permanent, cannot be harmed. So, yeah, that's an encouragement for me.
I wanted to reflect on what you were just saying, but it's so important in the sense of the women that participated in the project. One, I also, I thought about this, how brave, how courageous, and it may well have been the first time that any of them had the opportunity to actually learn about mudras, to even think about themselves as more than just a body. And I wonder, interested and curious for folks who came and for folks who completed the writing, their experience about I'm more than my body. And like I said, the spirit never dies, it just goes on and on. But to be able to do that, having cancer it's a very scary thing. And, in the back, there is like that question, am I going to die? We are going to die. We just don't know when. It may not be the cancer, right? But the project really was a great space to be able to have healing in community, to see people talk about and also learn about all the other things. So many of the guests that were part of the project had some very powerful information and tons of like things that I didn't know. You mentioned earlier about some of the environmental things, hair products, et cetera, So anyway.
Yes, yes, yes. And I had women to actually write or to say to me afterwards, I learned so much in this workshop. One woman wrote, I couldn't wait to go home on day one to tell my family everything that I learned that day. And another woman wrote that this is so important. You should be teaching it to everybody, not just people who are journeying with cancer. And you're right. We've spent so much time on things that don't matter, like the Kardashians, you know, you know, and I could make a list or whatever, but we don't spend that time really looking into ourselves, really understanding what is this mind, body, spirit complex? What am I? I like the question, what am I more than who am I, right? Because there's so much to understand about this incredible vehicle that we've been gifted with to walk through life in, and all of the systems that are a part of it and how they interact and work with each other, and how we're creating all the time with our thoughts. Like we're master creators, and every thought is actually producing something. And if you want to know what the thinking is like, look at the external part of the life, because that's an outpicturing of the internal world.
What you said, that's really powerful. I recently picked up old book called As a Man Thinketh. I might, to be gender correct, as a person thinketh, a woman thinketh. And it is a very simple little book, and that's exactly it. And Buddhism really speaks to that as well. I am my thoughts, and how important it is for me to pay attention, close attention to my thoughts. And it took me years to be able to accept that as factual, not something made up, and then to start to practice, sometimes really diligently, and sometimes I said I wake up and I fall asleep, but most lately I've really been setting the tone for positivity and gratitude in my life, and reminding myself that how I think is going to shape my day and shape my life. So
Absolutely.
that's so powerful that you said that, though, because the other thing is, if I walk into my healing journey with a very negative attitude, it portends a very poor outcome for me. It might look like depression. It might look like isolation. It might look like, and again, as I said, I do sit with this every day, that I'm of the nature to die, but I want to die a good death. What I mean by that is, I'm at peace with that. I'm at peace with that.
Yes, laying in my bed, just going to sleep and then going on to the next realm. you know?
Or you know, the stories that we tell ourselves to scare ourselves, which don't really help us. For me, really, I find compassion. And I say this a lot, just throw some love on it. Keep throwing love on it. Keep throwing love on it. That is the super sauce. That's the healing salve. That's something we don't get enough of. And it's an action. It's just not a word.
Absolutely. This is incredible. I so enjoyed this time with you. I want to, and I just really appreciate all the wisdom and all the lived experience that produced that wisdom, and, the grace that's flowing through your life and that we get a chance to benefit from at Moyo and in the Love Letters project. And, just me and you as friends. So it's a beautiful thing. So I wonder if you want to talk more about anything in particular. If you want to talk about projects or adventures that you're working on. I know that you are a person with a ton of incredible ideas and a lot of passion. And I know you're doing something profound that we need to know about. So,
Before we tidy up, I'm hoping that you'll have me back. I've got lots of thoughts about healing and the importance of this as these kinds of conversations, but the importance for Black and Brown people that we do this in a public setting, we do it out loud, that we speak it into existence. I have been, again, I've been doing a lot of work around public health, but mostly Black and Brown healing. And most lately, as I transitioned from one career of Western medicine, looking at working more with conscious awareness, I will use that, spiritual knowing. I did say that, we have our own inner intelligence, each of us does. And sometimes we're blocked from that. We're blocked because of the stories. We're blocked because of just the difficulties that we have to face. And we all have them. We all have them. One of the things that I've been doing is I'm working, and I don't know if you have a lot of familiarity with sacred medicine. And this is a big topic, and maybe you'll have me back again. But some of the ways of thinking that we were talking about that really are imprinted, sacred medicine sometimes can help us get beyond that kind of repetitive, ruminative, same pattern and habit, and help us just create, and I love this word, it's like a black hole portal, allows us to slip through to see something else that will help us heal something so incredibly important that we can let go of a story and do something in us that is blocking us from the kind of life that we want. But we have to actually begin to think that's possible. And so I'm doing a lot of work in that, and I work a lot in recovery with, I work in the areas where I've had lots of these problems in my family, and so wanting to heal some of these things. And for me, sacred medicine offers a way to just heal some of the trauma, generational trauma as well.
beautiful, beautiful. Well, we'll definitely continue this conversation another time. And I'll also take you up on the suggestion that you interview me. And I think I like this interview so well that this will be the first episode of Love Letters podcast.
Before we go, because to know, you can find me on Instagram at Cura Sagrada, and also at Melanating Psychedelics. And that's, please stay tuned for a podcast where we'll talk about all things in the Black psychedelic sphere and how psychedelics work. And you can certainly outreach to me through Moyo. I would love to be able to continue this conversation.
In fact, we'll make sure that all that information is included in the show notes so that people can, in fact, find you, which is really important as well.
And we're going to have you as a guest. I would love that.
Thank you so much. So you've been listening to Dr. Lucretia Bolin, and she's just been incredible sharing her knowledge, her wisdom, and the grace that's flowing through her life with us today.
That's a wrap. Thank you so much for listening to Love Letters to Our Bodies, conversations on health, healing, and happiness. To find out more about the Love Letters to Our Bodies project, visit our website at moyoinstitute.org. That's MOYO Institute.org. Follow us on social media and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. If there are topics you'd like for us to discuss, let us know. Remember, your body is beautiful, girlfriend. Love it.